The flashbulbs were a symphony of tiny explosions, a frantic, glittering storm reserved for Hollywood royalty and titans of industry. But the woman who stepped onto the rain-slicked crimson carpet that night was neither. She was a ghost, a memory, a footnote in the story of the man who had discarded her. Her ex-husband, the celebrated architect Brendan Thorne, once told a magazine she was too plain for his world. Tonight, in a dress the color of vengeance and embers, she wasn't just entering his world, she was about to burn it to the ground. This isn't just a revenge story. This is the story of how a woman they tried to erase became unforgettable. Audrey Hayes believed in the quiet integrity of things. She believed in the strength of a well-made joint, the honesty of unvarnished wood, and the subtle beauty of a design that served its function flawlessly. For 12 years, this belief system had extended to her marriage with Brendan Thorne. He was the visionary, the face of their architectural partnership. She was the foundation, the unseen structural engineer of his soaring success. Their home, a minimalist masterpiece of glass and steel overlooking the California coastline, was Brendan's design, but it was Audrey's soul. She had ensured the morning light hit the kitchen island at precisely 7:05 a.m., just as he liked it for his morning espresso. She had calibrated the acoustics in his study so that the ocean's roar was a soothing murmur, not a distraction. She managed the staff, the finances, the intricate social calendar that propped up his burgeoning fame. She wore muted tones, charcoal navy beige, so as not to clash with the carefully curated aesthetic of their life. She was a seamless functional, and she was beginning to fear invisible part of the Brendan Thorne brand. The cracks started as hairline fractures, a lingering glance he'd give a brightly dressed woman at a gallery opening, a passing comment about how Sophia Alcott, a rival firm's glamorous PR head, really knew how to own a room. Audrey, in her sensible black dress, would just smile, her hand tightening on her wineglass. She was his partner, his confidant. They had built this empire from a cramped studio apartment, fueled by cheap coffee and her brilliant, unorthodox design theories, which he had a genius for articulating to the world. That was their dynamic. He was the poet, she was the grammar. The first major fissure happened on a Tuesday. Brendan had just landed the cover of Architecture Today. The photo was a masterpiece of masculine confidence, Brendan, in a crisp white shirt, leaning against the schematics of the award-winning Serafina Tower. His Serafina Tower. Audrey's heart clenched when she saw it. The core concept, the double helix structure that allowed for unprecedented energy efficiency and green space, was born from her late-night sketches, doodled on a napkin during a forgotten dinner. She had given him the idea, as she had given him so many others, assuming it was for them. "It's a great photo, Bren," she said, her voice carefully neutral as she placed the magazine on the marble countertop. He didn't look up from his tablet. They wanted something iconic. I think we gave it to them. We. The word felt hollow. The article is glowing, she continued, pushing. They call you the sole visionary behind the tower. He finally looked at her, his blue eyes holding a cool, appraising quality she'd never seen before. Well, I'm the one who sells it, Audrey. You know that. You're brilliant with the nuts and bolts, the theory. But people buy a story. They buy a face. It's just business. It was the first time he had so clearly drawn a line between them. Not us, but you and I. The brilliant but plain mechanic, and the handsome, charismatic driver. The final catastrophic break came a month later. He sat her down in their cavernous living room, the setting sun casting long, lonely shadows across the floor. He didn't fumble or hesitate. His speech was as clean and polished as one of his designs. "This isn't working anymore," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "My life, my career, is moving in a certain direction. I need a partner who can keep pace, who complements the vision." Audrey felt the air leave her lungs. "Complements the vision, Brendan. I helped build the vision." He sighed, a sound of weary impatience that was more insulting than any shout. Audrey, be realistic. We've grown apart. I'm out there at galas at fundraisers with clients who expect a certain presentation, and you're. He gestured vaguely at her simple grey cashmere sweater and comfortable jeans. You're wonderful, you're smart, you're comfortable. But this world, my world, it doesn't run on comfort. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and shameful. So this is about how I dress, because I don't wear designer gowns to walk the dog. It's not just the clothes, he said, his voice hardening. It's the whole package. It's an energy, an ambition. He stood up, pacing in front of the window, a perfect silhouette against the dying light. I'm filing for divorce. I've already spoken to my lawyer. It will be generous. You'll be well taken care of. She was speechless. 12 years reduced to a transaction. There's someone else, isn't there? The name was a bitter taste in her mouth. It's Sophia Alcott. He didn't deny it. The lack of denial was a physical blow. Sophia understands the demands of my world. She thrives in it. The divorce was swift and brutal. His lawyers painted her as a simple homemaker who had been a passenger in Brendan's meteoric rise. They argued that his genius was a singular entity, and she was merely a supportive spouse entitled to a settlement, but certainly not to any part of his intellectual property or his firm, Thorn Architecture. Her own sketches, her notebooks filled with the foundational concepts of his greatest works, were dismissed as the idle doodlings of a hobbyist. She was too exhausted, too heartbroken to fight. She just wanted it to be over. She took the settlement and disappeared. 2 months later, the ultimate humiliation arrived not in a legal document, but on the glossy pages of Prestige magazine. It was a fawning profile of Brendan and his new official partner, Sophia. The headline was, "Building a Legacy." The interviewer asked him about his previous marriage. Brendan's quote was etched into Audrey's memory with acid. My ex-wife is a good woman, he'd said, a picture of magnanimity, but we were on different paths. My world requires a certain level of polish. She was, let's be honest, she was a bit too plain. Wonderful for a quiet life, but not suited for the spotlight I now find myself in. Too plain. The words echoed in the small, anonymous apartment. She now rented a place with beige walls and generic art. She looked at her reflection in the dark window. Plain face, plain hair, plain clothes. He had not only left her, he had defined her. He had taken her work, her life, her love, and then he had erased her, leaving behind only a 2-word epitaph. Too plain. She sank onto her sofa, the magazine falling from her numb fingers. The world saw Brendan Thorne as a visionary. They saw Sophia Alcott as his glamorous equal, and Audrey Hayes. The world didn't see her at all. She was just a ghost, haunting the foundations of a life that was no longer hers. In the quiet darkness, a single cold tear traced a path down her cheek. It was not a tear of sadness. It was a tear of pure, unadulterated rage. The 6 months that followed the Prestige article were a study in grey. Audrey's life had been stripped down to its barest studs. The vibrant, complex blueprint of her marriage was gone, replaced by the 4 walls of a painfully average 2-bedroom apartment in a less fashionable part of the city. The ocean view was replaced by a view of a brick wall. The bespoke kitchen was replaced by a galley with a temperamental stove. She had money from the settlement, more than she'd ever had in her own name, but it felt like blood money, a severance package for a stolen identity. She existed in a uniform of grey sweatpants and old t-shirts. Her brilliant mind, once occupied with complex structural equations and innovative material science, now grappled with the monumental task of getting out of bed. She'd watch the news sometimes, a form of self-flagellation. There was Brendan cutting a ribbon at a new museum he'd designed. There he was again, hand in hand with Sophia at a charity ball. Sophia dazzling in a silver gown, looking every bit the woman suited for the spotlight. The media narrative had solidified. Brendan Thorne was the lone genius, and Sophia was his muse. Thorne Architecture was landing bigger and more prestigious contracts than ever before. Their brand was hotter than ever, built on the lie that Audrey was just a footnote. Her only tether to her former life, to herself, was Jenna. Jenna Marks was a force of nature, a sharp-tongued, fiercely loyal fashion publicist who had been Audrey's friend since college. She was the only one who had ever seen past Audrey's quiet exterior to the fire within. Jenna would show up at Audrey's apartment unannounced, armed with gourmet coffee and a brutal honesty that was its own form of medicine. "Okay, Howard Hughes. Time to rejoin the living," Jenna said one afternoon, kicking aside a pile of junk mail as she entered. She found Audrey on the couch, staring at a blank television screen. "I'm fine," Audrey mumbled. "You're fine in the way a collapsed building is fine." "The rubble is technically still there, but nobody's living in it," Jenna retorted, pulling open the blinds. Sunlight, harsh and unwelcome, flooded the room. "Have you seen this?" Jenna tossed a tablet onto Audrey's lap. It was open to an architectural blog. The headline read, "Thorne's Ethelgard Concert Hall, hailed as a paradigm shift in acoustic design." Audrey's breath hitched. The Ethelgard. She remembered sketching the initial concept on a flight to Milan 2 years ago. The swooping, sail-like baffles designed to mimic the inner ear, creating perfect, lossless sound from any seat in the house. It was her baby, one of the most complex and innovative ideas she'd ever had. She'd shown the sketches to Brendan, her excitement palpable. He had called it too academic, too risky, and now here it was being hailed as his masterpiece. He didn't even change the core design. Audrey whispered, her fingers tracing the lines on the screen. "He just built it." "Of course he did, honey," Jenna said, her voice softening slightly. "The man has the creativity of a photocopier. He was always the salesman. You were always the architect. You know it, and I know it. The problem is the world doesn't." Audrey leaned back, the fight draining out of her. "What does it matter? He has the firm, the name, the power. My old notebooks are just paper. He'll say I was inspired by him. Who would they believe?" "They'll believe the woman who stops letting him write her story," Jenna said fiercely. She knelt in front of Audrey, forcing her to make eye contact. "Audrey, listen to me. You are one of the most brilliant people I have ever known. You see the world in a way no one else does. He didn't just leave you, he robbed you. He's living in a world you designed, and he's getting all the credit. You can either stay in this grey apartment and fade away completely, or you can start drafting a new blueprint." For weeks, Jenna's words echoed in the silence. A new blueprint. It seemed impossible. Where would she even start? She was Audrey Hayes, the plain ex-wife. She had no firm, no credentials in her own name, no recent portfolio. Everything she had created for the past 12 years was stamped with the name Thorne. The turning point came in the form of a thick, cream-colored envelope that arrived by courier. Her hands trembled as she saw the logo embossed in gold on the back, the Vanguard Architecture Prize. It was the most prestigious awards in the industry, the Oscars of architecture. She opened it. It was an invitation to the annual Vanguard Gala. Her name was listed, Ms. Audrey Hayes. Below it, in parentheses, it read, "Guest of Thorne Architecture." A courtesy invitation, a throwaway gesture. Brendan, in his infinite generosity, had likely kept her on some vestigial mailing list. He probably assumed she'd throw it away, or even that she'd be too ashamed to ever show her face. He was inviting the ghost to the feast. She stared at the invitation. The gala was in 2 months. It was being held to celebrate the year's greatest achievements. The keynote prize, the Vanguard Medal, was almost certainly going to be awarded to Brendan Thorne for the Ethelgard Concert Hall. Her concert hall. He would be there at the absolute zenith of his career, accepting an award for her work. Sophia would be on his arm, radiant and triumphant, and the world would applaud. A slow, cold fire began to burn in Audrey's chest, melting away the grey fog of the past few months. He thought she was plain, invisible. erased. He was counting on her to stay that way. She picked up her phone and called Jenna. Her voice was steady, clear, and devoid of the broken woman it had been for months. "Jenna," she said, "I need a dress. And not just any dress. I need you to help me find a dress that can start a war." There was a pause on the other end, and then Jenna's voice filled with a gleeful, dangerous excitement. "Oh, honey, we're not starting a war. We're staging a demolition." The decision to attend the Vanguard Gala was like flipping a master switch in a building that had long been dark. For the first time in nearly a year, Audrey felt a surge of power, a sense of purpose. It wasn't just about showing up. It was about making a statement so loud it would deafen the narrative Brendan had so carefully constructed. Jenna, true to her word, orchestrated the entire operation with the precision of a military strategist. Her apartment became their war room, its walls covered not with architectural drawings, but with mood boards, designer lookbooks, and swatches of fabric. First, the ground rules, Jenna declared, pacing in front of a corkboard. 1. This is not about winning him back. This is about taking your power back. 2. This is not about being prettier than Sophia. This is about being more interesting than everyone in the room combined. 3. We are not aiming for pretty. Pretty is forgettable. We are aiming for iconic. Audrey, sipping a green tea, felt a flicker of her old self. The analytical mind that could solve complex spatial problems now focused on this new challenge. Iconic is subjective. We need a clear objective. "What is the message?" Jenna grinned, pointing at Audrey with a pen. "There she is. That's my girl. The message is simple: you made a mistake. Not a "please take me back" mistake. A "you've fundamentally misunderstood the asset you discarded" mistake. It's a message of value, of power, of art. Their mission began not with dresses, but with Audrey herself. Jenna dragged her to a sleek private gym run by a former Israeli Special Forces trainer. The workouts were punishing, designed to build not just muscle, but mental fortitude. With every painful rep, Audrey felt herself shedding the soft, formless despair that had clung to her. She was building a new frame, a stronger foundation. Next came hair and skin. Jenna booked her with specialists who treated their work like a restoration project. They didn't try to change Audrey's features, but to amplify them. They gave her a haircut that framed her intelligent eyes and strong jawline, a cut that was chic and intentional, not comfortable. They put her on a skincare regimen that brought a glow back to her face, a luminosity that had been dulled by grief. As her body and face transformed, so did her mind. She started sketching again. At first it was tentative, small details, a new kind of joint, a thought on light refraction through glass. But soon she was filling entire notebooks. The ideas flowed sharper and more innovative than ever before. She realized with a startling clarity that for years she had been subconsciously designing for Brendan, taming her more radical ideas to fit his more commercial, palatable brand. Now, unbound, her creativity was explosive. She was designing for herself. The search for the dress was the final, most crucial piece of the puzzle. They visited the ateliers of all the big-name designers. They saw beautiful gowns, sequined, feathered, draped in silk. They were all stunning, but none of them were right. "They're all costumes," Audrey said, after a long day in Beverly Hills, sinking into the passenger seat of Jenna's car. "They're designed to make a woman fit in on a red carpet. I need something that makes me stand out from it." Jenna tapped her fingers on the steering wheel, a thoughtful look on her face. "You're right. We're looking in the wrong places. We're looking for fashion. We need to be looking for art." That night, Jenna went down a rabbit hole of obscure fashion blogs and art school showcases. At 3 a.m., she sent Audrey a single frantic text: "I found him." The link led to a profile on a young designer named Mateo Vargas. He was a recent graduate of a prestigious design school, but he had shunned the commercial fashion world. His work was architectural, structural, and deeply emotional. He created one-of-a-kind pieces, each with a narrative. His latest unfinished collection was called Kintsugi, the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with gold, celebrating the cracks as part of the object's history. This is it, Audrey breathed, looking at the images. His designs weren't just clothes, they were sculptures. They found Matteo in a small dusty studio in a warehouse district, surrounded by dress forms, sketches, and bolts of strange, beautiful fabrics. He was intense with dark eyes that saw more than just the surface. Audrey didn't tell him her full story. She didn't need to. She spoke to him in the language they both understood: design. "I am attending an event," she began, her voice steady. "I have spent the last year of my life feeling demolished, invisible. I need to walk into a room and be the opposite of that. I need a dress that embodies the idea of reconstruction, of coming back from ash, not hiding the breaks, but making them the most beautiful part of the structure." Matteo listened, his gaze unwavering. He walked around her slowly, not looking at her body, but seemingly at her energy, her outline. He didn't speak for a full minute. Then he went to a draped form in the corner of the room. With a single fluid motion, he pulled back the dust sheet. Audrey gasped. It was a dress, but it was unlike anything she had ever seen. It was the color of a dying fire, a deep, smoldering crimson that shifted to burnt orange and gold under the light. The fabric was a heavy silk charmeuse that looked liquid. But the genius of it was in the details. Intricate web-like beadwork of black jet and gold thread snaked across the bodice and down one side, not in a random pattern, but looking exactly like beautiful, deliberate cracks. It was kintsugi in fabric form. The silhouette was daring, a high neck, long sleeves, but a slash of a cutout that exposed her newly toned back, and a slit up the thigh that was both elegant and defiant. "I call it the Phoenix," Matteo said softly. "It was for my kintsugi collection. I hadn't found the right woman to give it life. A structure is not complete until it has an occupant." Audrey reached out her fingers, hovering over the silk. This dress was not a disguise. It was a manifestation of everything she had been through and everything she was becoming. It was her pain, her rage, her resilience, and her genius, all woven into a single, breathtaking form. "May I try it on?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. The moment the silk settled over her skin, something shifted. She turned to look in the tall, slightly grimy mirror in the corner of the studio. The woman staring back was not the plain, comfortable Audrey. She was not the broken, grey Audrey. This woman was a stranger, and she was magnificent. She was powerful. She was art. The dress didn't wear her. She inhabited it. It was her new skin. Jenna, who had been watching in silence, let out a slow, shaky breath. "Well," she said, her voice filled with awe, "the demolition is officially scheduled." The 2 weeks leading up to the Vanguard Gala were a blur of final preparations. Every detail was meticulously planned. The shoes were custom-made by an artisan in Italy, their impossibly thin heels engineered for both height and stability, a perfect metaphor for Audrey herself. The jewelry was minimal, but significant. A pair of black diamond earrings, sharp and brilliant, like shards of obsidian. No necklace. The dress was the statement. Matteo Vargas made the final alterations himself, treating the dress with a reverence that moved Audrey. He wasn't just fitting a garment. He was arming a warrior. On their last fitting, he stood back and nodded slowly. "When you walk, walk from your core," he advised, his voice quiet but firm. "Do not rush. Let them see every detail. Let them see the story." The night of the gala, a nervous energy crackled in Audrey's apartment. It felt different from the pre-event jitters she used to experience with Brendan. That had been the anxiety of a stage manager, hoping the star would hit his marks. This was the tension of a headliner about to take the stage for the very first time. Jenna was there, a whirlwind of calm command coordinating everything. She had hired a top-tier hair and makeup artist, a man named Antoine, who typically only worked with A-list actresses. Antoine worked in silence, his focus absolute. He didn't try to paint a new face on Audrey. He used his skills to highlight what was already there: the sharp intelligence in her eyes, the elegant curve of her lips, the strength in her jaw. The final look was breathtaking. It was Audrey, but amplified to her highest possible frequency. When she finally slipped into the phoenix dress, the transformation was complete. The crimson silk felt like a second skin, cool and empowering. She looked at her reflection. The woman in the mirror was formidable. The elegant lines of the dress showcased the strength she had built. The cracks of golden thread and black jet seemed to shimmer with an inner light. She looked like a queen who had survived a coup and was returning to reclaim her throne. Jenna let out a low whistle. Brendan Thorne isn't going to know what hit him. He's expecting a ghost. He's about to get a goddess of vengeance. It's not about vengeance anymore, Jenna, Audrey said, her voice calm and centered. She felt a strange, serene clarity. It's about truth. Jenna had arranged for a private car. As they rode towards the gleaming edifice of the Ethelgard Concert Hall, the very building born of her genius, Audrey felt no fear, only a cold, thrilling resolve. The plan was simple. She would arrive alone. She would walk the carpet. She would not seek Brendan out. She would simply exist powerfully and unapologetically in his space. Jenna had also, with a publicist's sly genius, tipped off a single influential photographer from a major wire service. The tip was vague. Keep an eye out for a woman in red. You won't know her name, but she's the real story tonight. The car pulled up to the curb. Through the tinted window, Audrey could see the chaotic ballet of the red carpet. Flashes strobed relentlessly. Reporters shouted questions at passing celebrities and industry power players. And there near the entrance was Brendan. He was holding Court Sophia on his arm. Sophia looked stunning in a predictable, glittering gold dress. She was laughing radiant. Brendan looked like a king in his domain. Showtime, Jenna whispered, squeezing Audrey's hand. Remember what Matteo said. Walk from your core. The driver opened her door. The moment Audrey's shoe, that elegant, impossibly sharp heel, hit the crimson carpet, the atmosphere shifted. It began with a single photographer, the one Jenna had tipped off, who turned his lens away from a well-known actor to focus on this new arrival. His flash went off. For a moment there was nothing but that one solitary pop of light. Audrey paused at the car door, holding the pose for a fraction of a second, letting the image register. The crimson of her dress was a perfect shocking match for the carpet beneath her, making it seem as if she had risen directly from it. Then a second photographer turned. Then a third. A confused murmur rippled through the press line. Who is that? Is she an actress? Look at that dress. Audrey began to walk. She moved with a slow, deliberate grace, her posture perfect, her gaze fixed forward, looking not at the cameras, but towards the entrance of the hall. She didn't offer a practiced plastic smile. Her expression was one of serene, unshakable confidence. The dress flowed around her like liquid fire, the golden cracks catching the light with every step. She was a living piece of art, a stark, stunning contrast to the predictable glamour around her. The murmur grew into a buzz. The photographers, sensing a moment, surged towards her. The flashes became a blinding, continuous wave of light. They were no longer just taking pictures. They were trying to capture lightning in a bottle. Shouts erupted. Ma'am, who are you wearing? Look this way. Just one shot. What's your name? She ignored them all, her focus absolute. Her path took her directly past the spot where Brendan and Sophia were standing. Brendan had heard the commotion and turned an annoyed look on his face, irritated that someone was stealing his thunder. His eyes scanned the crowd, and then they landed on Audrey. The change in his expression was a spectacle in itself. The smug confidence vanished, replaced by sheer uncomprehending shock. His jaw literally dropped. The color drained from his face. It was as if he had seen a spectre, but a spectre more vibrant and alive, than anyone there. He didn't see the plain, comfortable woman he had dismissed. He saw the magnificent, formidable creature on the carpet. For a split second, his eyes were wide with a confusion that bordered on fear. Sophia followed his gaze. Her perfectly made-up face tightened. The professional smile froze and then curdled into a mask of disbelief and pure, unadulterated fear. She recognized Audrey, but she couldn't reconcile the woman she saw with the mousy footnote she'd been told about. Audrey's eyes met Brendan's for a single fleeting second. She didn't smile. She didn't sneer. She simply held his gaze, her expression unreadable, and then she looked away, dismissing him as if he were nothing more than a piece of scenery. She continued her slow, regal walk towards the doors of the concert hall. Her concert hall, leaving behind a trail of stunned silence, frantic photographers, and the shattered composure of the man who had claimed she was too plain for his world. The internet was about to break, and the woman in crimson had just lit the match. Inside the grand foyer of the Ethelgard Concert Hall, the air hummed with the self-congratulatory buzz of the architectural elite. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne, and conversations were a low murmur of shop talk and gossip. Audrey stepped through the doors, and a bubble of silence expanded around her. Heads turned, conversations faltered. The visual power of her presence was even more potent indoors, away from the frenzy of the cameras. She took a glass of champagne, her hand perfectly steady, and moved to a relatively quiet spot near one of the soaring glass walls that overlooked the city. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, feel the whispered questions darting through the air like invisible hummingbirds. She did not engage. She simply stood, an island of crimson stillness, observing the room. She was not there to mingle. She was there to be seen. Meanwhile, outside, the digital world was exploding. The first photos hit the wire services and social media within minutes. The initial captions were confused. Mystery woman in red stuns at Vanguard Gala. Who is this stunning guest? Jenna, monitoring from her war room, aka her laptop at a nearby bar, watched with glee as the images went viral. The hashtags started trending. #Lady in Red, #Vanguard Gala, #Mystery Woman. Fashion bloggers, celebrity watchers, and the general public were captivated. The dress, the Phoenix, was analyzed and praised as a masterpiece. But the real obsession was with the woman wearing it. Her poise, her confidence, her story-filled eyes. Then someone connected the dots. An older journalist who had covered Brendan Thorne's career for years recognized her. A tweet went out that changed the entire conversation. Source confirms the mystery woman at the HAL Vanguard Gala is Audrey Hayes, the ex-wife of architect Brendan Thorne. This is her first public appearance since their divorce. Too plain. The addition of the hashtag #TooPlain was a tactical nuclear strike. It recontextualized everything. Suddenly, this wasn't just a fashion moment. It was a drama, a story of revenge, a saga. The internet hive mind went into overdrive, digging up the old Prestige magazine article with Brendan's infamous quote. Side-by-side images flooded social media. On one side, Brendan's arrogant quote. On the other, the photo of Audrey, regal and devastating in her crimson dress. The narrative flipped with brutal speed. Brendan Thorne, the visionary genius, was recast as the villain. A fool, the man who had a goddess in his house and was too blind to see it. Back in the hall, Brendan and Sophia finally entered, their faces and pale and strained. They were trying to pretend nothing had happened, but the atmosphere had irrevocably shifted. People were looking at them differently, their smiles a little too tight, their eyes filled with a new speculative curiosity. They could feel the whispers. They were no longer the power couple of the hour. They were the co-stars in Audrey Hayes' drama. Brendan saw Audrey across the room. He started to move towards her, his expression a mixture of anger and a strange, desperate confusion. He had to regain control of the narrative. But before he could reach her, Another figure intercepted Audrey. It was Elias Santoro. Elias Santoro was a living legend in the architectural world. A Pritzker Prize winner from decades ago, he was now a reclusive, almost mythical figure, known for his fiercely intellectual and uncompromising designs. He rarely attended public events. His presence alone was a major coup for the gala. He was 70, with a wild mane of white hair and eyes that had seen and designed everything. He walked directly up to Audrey, ignoring the hushed awe his movement created. Brendan froze, mid-stride, watching. "I do not know your name," Santoro said, his voice a gravelly baritone with a thick Italian accent. "But I know that dress. It has bones. It has a story. It is architecture, not fashion. And the woman inside it has the same look in her eyes as I had when I designed my first impossible building." Audrey, for the first time that night, felt a genuine, unfeigned warmth spread through her. This was the recognition she craved, not from the gawking crowd, but from a true master. "My name is Audrey Hayes," she said, her voice clear and strong. Santoro's eyes widened slightly. "Hayes, not Thorne. Not anymore," she replied. A slow smile spread across Santoro's face. He looked across the room, his gaze flicking contemptuously over Brendan and then back to Audrey. "Ah, I see. He was always a very good salesman. I never understood where the ideas came from." He leaned in closer. "The acoustics in this hall are remarkable. The concept of the inner ear baffle system is not something a salesman thinks of. It is something a musician or a mathematician or a true architect thinks of." Audrey's heart hammered against her ribs. He saw it. He knew. "It was an idea I had a few years ago," she said, choosing her words carefully. "I am sure it was," Santoro said, his eyes twinkling. He handed her his card. "When you are done making your point here tonight, call me. People with ideas like that should be building, not simply making an entrance, even one as magnificent as this." He gave a slight bow and walked away, leaving Audrey with his card in her hand, and the entire room buzzing with the implications of what they had just witnessed. The legendary Elias Santoro had not only sought her out, he had publicly validated her, and in the same breath dismissed Brendan Thorne. Brendan looked as if he had been struck by lightning. His moment of triumph the night he was to be crowned king had been utterly hijacked. He was no longer the star. He was a supporting character in a story about the ex-wife he had so foolishly underestimated. The foundation of his world had just developed a massive, irreparable crack. And across the room, his ghost, his plain, erased wife, was holding the proof that she was about to build a new world all on her own. The gala itself became a footnote. The main event was happening on phones, tablets, and television screens across the globe. By the time the award ceremony began, Audrey Hayes was the #1 trending topic worldwide. News outlets were scrambling, reporters were writing think pieces, and a cottage industry of memes had sprung up. The most popular one featured a split-screen Brendan's two-plane quote next to the photo of Audrey talking to Elias Santoro, captioned, "He thought he was trading up, but he traded a queen for a pawn." When Brendan's name was finally called to accept the Vanguard Medal for the Ethelgard Concert Hall, the applause was noticeably muted, polite rather than enthusiastic. As he walked to the stage, he looked haunted. His prepared speech about his singular vision and artistic journey suddenly sounded hollow defensive. He kept glancing into the audience, but Audrey's seat was empty. She and Jenna had slipped out right after her conversation with Santoro, their mission accomplished. Her absence was now more powerful than her presence. The true demolition, however, began the next morning. The global attention on Audrey Hayes had an unintended consequence for Brendan. It made people look closer, it made them ask questions, and it made a man named David Chen very, very brave. David Chen was a junior architect who who had worked at Thorn Architecture for 5 years before being unceremoniously fired by Brendan 6 months ago for lacking vision. In reality, David had questioned the ethics of a few projects and was deemed not to be a team player. He had left embittered and disillusioned. He had also, out of a mix of spite and self-preservation, made copies of some files from the company server before he was locked out. He had watched the gala unfold online from his small apartment, his heart pounding. He had always known Audrey was the real genius. He had seen her early sketches, witnessed her quietly solving impossible design problems that had stumped the entire team, only to watch Brendan present the solutions as his own in meetings an hour later. Seeing Audrey rise like a phoenix, seeing the world finally question the official story, gave him the courage he needed. He contacted a respected investigative journalist at the New York Times, a woman named Alani Farik, who was known for her tenacious deep dives into corporate fraud. He sent her an encrypted email with the subject line, "The Real Architect of Thorn Architecture." Attached was a treasure trove of evidence, early conceptual sketches for the Serafina Tower and the Ethelgard Hall, all clearly in Audrey's distinct hand, with timestamps from her old company email predating Brendan's official discoveries. There were drafts of proposals written in her voice, and even a saved audio file of a meeting where Brendan dismisses her acoustic baffle idea, only to present a slightly modified version as his own a month later. 2 days later, the New York Times published Alani Farik's bombshell exposé, "The Ghost in the Machine: How Architect Brendan Thorn Built His Empire on the Work of His Ex-Wife, Audrey Hayes." The story was devastating, meticulously researched and backed by undeniable proof. It painted a portrait of a charismatic fraud who had systematically co-opted his wife's brilliance, building his fame and fortune on a foundation of lies. David Chen was quoted as an on-the-record source, and his testimony opened the floodgates. 2 other former employees came forward to corroborate the story, describing the toxic environment and Brendan's habit of idea harvesting. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The Vanguard Prize Committee announced they were launching an investigation. Clients began pulling out of multi-million-dollar contracts. The board of directors of Thorn Architecture called an emergency meeting. Sophia Alcott, seeing the empire crumble and her own reputation tarnished by association, quietly packed her bags and disappeared from Brendan's life, releasing a statement, through her lawyer, that she had been misled. Brendan was trapped. He tried to issue a denial, calling it the bitter ramblings of a disgruntled ex-wife and fired employees, but the evidence was too strong. The public had already passed judgment on the red carpet, and the Times article was merely the closing argument. A week after the gala, his world in ruins. Brendan showed up at Audrey's apartment building. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. His expensive suit was rumpled, his face was gaunt. He managed to get past the doorman, looking so pathetic that he was mistaken for a delivery person. Audrey opened the door to find him standing there, a ghost of the man he once was. "Audrey," he croaked, "we need to talk." She didn't invite him in. She simply stood in the doorway, her expression calm. There was no anger, no triumph, just a quiet finality. "There's nothing to talk about, Brendan," she said. "They're destroying me," he said, his voice cracking. "Everything. It's all gone. You have to make a statement. Tell them it was a collaboration, a misunderstanding. We can fix this." Audrey looked at him, at this man who had called her plain, who had erased her, who had stolen her life's work. She felt nothing but a profound, empty pity. "You're right," she said softly. "They are destroying you. But I didn't do it. The truth did. You built your house on a faulty foundation, Brendan. It was always going to collapse. I just happened to be standing there when it did." He stared at her, finally understanding. This wasn't a negotiation. It was an obituary. "What do you want?" he whispered desperately. "Money credit. What will it take to make this stop?" Audrey thought for a moment. She thought of the grey sweatpants, the empty apartment, the stolen dreams. She thought of the crimson dress and the look in Elias Santoro's eyes. "I already have what I want," she said, and for the first time she gave him a small, genuine smile. "I have my name back." With that, she quietly closed the door, leaving him alone in the hallway with the rubble of his life. The demolition was complete. The aftermath of Brendan Thorne's spectacular fall from grace was not the end of Audrey's story. It was the beginning. The world, now fully aware of her talent, was hungry for more. But Audrey had no interest in becoming a media spectacle or a symbol of scorned womanhood. She had reclaimed her name, and now she intended to build something with it. She took Elias Santoro's card, and after a week of composing her thoughts, she called him. They met not in a stuffy office, but for a walk through a botanical garden. He didn't want to talk about Brendan or the scandal. He wanted to talk about her ideas. For 2 hours, they walked among the meticulously designed landscapes, and Audrey talked. She spoke of her theories on biomimicry, in structural design, on creating buildings that didn't just house people, but actively enhanced their well-being through light, air, and space. She sketched ideas on a small notepad she carried, her hands moving with a fluid confidence. Santoro listened, interjecting with sharp, insightful questions. By the end of the walk, he made her an offer that stunned her. He wasn't offering her a job, he was offering her a partnership. "I am an old man," he said, his eyes sharp. "I have the name, the resources, the legacy. You have the future. I want to fund your own firm under your own name. Hayes Santoro Architecture. We will take on only the projects that matter, the ones that change things. You will be the lead designer, I will be your consigliere." And so, Hayes Santoro Architecture was born. They set up shop not in a flashy high-rise, but in a beautifully restored brick warehouse, a building with history, with good bones that Audrey herself redesigned to be a model of sustainable, human-centric workspace. Her first project was a public library for a low-income community, a project bigger firms had deemed unprofitable. She poured her soul into it, designing a space that was not just a repository for books, but a sanctuary of light learning and community. It won universal acclaim, not for its grandiosity, but for its profound humanity and quiet genius. The Phoenix dress was retired. It had been loaned to a museum for an exhibit on iconic moments in fashion. Its story, now part of cultural history. Audrey never wore it again. It had served its purpose. It was the wrecking ball that had cleared the site. Now her work was to build. She rarely thought of Brendan. News trickled in occasionally. He had lost his firm, his reputation, and the bulk of his fortune in lawsuits and settlements. He was last seen trying to launch a small-scale consulting business in another country, a man forever haunted by the shadow of the woman he had tried to erase. One evening, a year after the gala, Jenna came to visit Audrey's new office. The space was bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun, filled with young, brilliant architects debating ideas over drafting tables. Audrey was standing in the middle of it all, looking at a new set of blueprints, her face alive with passion and focus. She was wearing a simple, well-made black turtleneck and jeans, but she had never looked more radiant. "You know," Jenna said, leaning against a doorframe with a smile, "it's funny, he called you plain." Audrey looked up from her blueprints, her eyes catching the light. She looked around at the thriving firm she had built at the future, taking shape on the paper in front of her. A genuine, joyful smile spread across her face. "He wasn't entirely wrong," Audrey said, a twinkle in her eye. "I prefer a clean canvas. It gives you more room to build a masterpiece." She was no longer the erased woman, the ghost in the machine, or the lady in red. She was Audrey Hayes, the architect, and she was just getting started. And so, Audrey Hayes' story became more than just a viral moment. It became a testament to a powerful truth: your value is never determined by someone else's inability to see it. She walked onto that red carpet, not just to confront her ex-husband, but to confront the ghost of who she had allowed herself to become. The phoenix dress wasn't just fabric and thread. It was a declaration of independence, a promise she made to herself in front of the entire world. Her real triumph wasn't the downfall of Brendan Thorne, but the rise of Audrey Hayes. She didn't just get her revenge, she got her name, her legacy, and her future back. If this story of transformation and justice resonated with you, let us know in the comments below. Who do you think was the real villain in this story? Brendan or the society that enabled him? We'd love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that will leave you thinking long after the screen goes dark. Thank you for listening. What's the price of humiliation? For one man, it was a steak dinner. For his ex-wife, it was the cost of every single meal in a five-star restaurant. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's about a woman left with nothing who rebuilt an empire in silence. It's about a man so blinded by his own arrogance, he couldn't see the titan standing right in front of him. He told her she couldn't afford her meal. So, in an act that silenced an entire room and shattered a man's ego, she bought the entire restaurant for the night. Catherine Pierce traced the rim of her water glass, the condensation a cool, grounding sensation against her fingertips. Outside the panoramic window of her corner office, the Seattle skyline glittered a sprawling kingdom of glass and steel under a bruised twilight sky. This view, 28 floors up, had cost her everything she was, and in return had given her everything she had ever wanted. It was her sanctuary, the physical manifestation of a victory no one else knew she had won. 3 years. It had been 3 years, 2 months and 11 days since she had last seen Jonathan Caldwell, the man who had meticulously and methodically dismantled her life piece by piece, convinced he was doing her a favor. He had called her his beautiful, unambitious project, a lovely decorative object that was becoming too expensive to maintain. Their ending hadn't been a dramatic explosion, but a slow, corrosive burn. Jonathan, a senior analyst at a prestigious venture capital firm, worshipped at the altar of financial growth. His world was quantified in market caps, quarterly earnings, and the polished gleam of a new German sedan. Catherine, on the other hand, had found her passion in quieter things. She was a coder, a developer, but her projects weren't the disruptive tech bro fantasies Jonathan chased. She was building an idea, a platform she called TerraVerde, designed to connect consumers with verifiably sustainable and ethical businesses. Jonathan had scoffed. A charity project, Kate. People want cheap and fast, not artisanal kale and guilt-free coffee mugs. There's no money in saving the planet. The money is in selling them, the planet, packaged and branded. His words, meant to be pragmatic, were tiny, sharp cuts. He saw her passion as a liability. When his promotion to vice president loomed, the pressure intensified. He started bringing home colleagues, men with sharp suits and predatory smiles. Catherine, in her comfortable jeans and with code snippets still swirling in her head, felt like a foreign object in her own home. The final conversation had happened in their sterile white kitchen, a space designed by an architect Jonathan admired. "It's not working, Kate," he'd said, not looking at her, instead straightening a set of ludicrously expensive Japanese knives in their magnetic block. "What's not working? The Wi-Fi I can rebo us." He cut in, his voice, flat, devoid of emotion. It was the voice he used for a bad investment. "I'm looking at my 5-year plan, my 10-year plan. You're a rounding error. I need a partner who elevates my profile, who understands the game." Brittany does. Brittany, the sleek blonde marketing executive from his office. A woman who spoke in buzzwords and whose laughter sounded like tiny jingling bells of condescension. Catherine had felt the floor drop out. "You're leaving me for a 5-year plan." He finally turned to her, and his eyes held a look of profound, pitying disappointment. I'm not just leaving you, I'm setting you free. You can go run your little computer club without having to worry about keeping up appearances. He gestured around the multi-million-dollar condo. This isn't your world, Kate. You were never comfortable here. You'll be happier. The divorce was swift and brutal. His lawyers were sharks. They argued she had contributed nothing of monetary value to the marriage. Her work on Terra Verde was dismissed as a hobby. She walked away with a pittance, her personal belongings, and a single conceded asset, her small art collection. Jonathan had laughed at it. Take your sad little paintings. Maybe you can sell one to buy groceries. She had crashed on her friend Chloe's couch for 6 months, the shame a physical weight. Every night she'd stare at the ceiling, Jonathan's words echoing in her mind. You'll never make it without me. You don't have the instinct for survival. But as the weeks turned into months, shame curdled into fuel. She poured every waking hour into Terra Verde. She lived on instant noodles and cheap coffee, her world shrinking to the glowing screen of her laptop. She took on freelance coding gigs to pay for server space, her fingers flying across the keyboard with a desperate, furious energy. And then the breakthrough. It came from the very thing he'd mocked. One of the sad little paintings was an early work by an obscure artist named Lena Petrova, whom Catherine had believed in. A documentary on a streaming service suddenly thrust Petrova into the international spotlight, and the value of her early works skyrocketed. Catherine's sad little painting sold at auction for nearly $500,000. It was the seed money she needed. It was poetic karmic justice. She didn't buy a fancy car or a new wardrobe. She hired 2 of the best developers she knew, rented a tiny office, and poured every cent into making Terra Verde not just functional, but flawless. The app launched quietly 6 months later. For a month it was crickets. Then a popular eco-influencer discovered it. Her post went viral. The story of a platform that cut through corporate greenwashing resonated. Downloads surged. Businesses, big and small, clamored to be vetted for inclusion. Within a year, Terra Verde was the gold standard. Within 2, it was a tech unicorn valued at over $1 billion, and Catherine Pierce, its anonymous founder and CEO, was one of the most powerful new players in the industry. She kept her profile low, using a pseudonym for most public-facing communications. She hadn't wanted the fame. She'd wanted the success. She wanted to build the thing he said was worthless into an empire he couldn't even fathom. Tonight was a celebration. Terra Verde had just closed a landmark deal, acquiring its largest competitor. It was a monumental achievement. Chloe had insisted she go out. Go somewhere expensive and absurd, she'd urged. Go to Aria Ristorante, order the truffle pasta, and laugh at how you used to count pennies for ramen. So here she was, alone in a simple but elegant black dress, ready to have that truffle pasta. She wasn't looking for ghosts. She had long since buried them. But she had forgotten that in a city, even one as large as Seattle, ghosts have a way of finding you. Aria Ristorante was everything it promised to be, an exercise in opulent restraint. Low, warm lighting glinted off polished mahogany and crystal glasses. The air hummed with the quiet confidence of old money and the boisterous laughter of the newly minted. A soft, live piano melody trickled through the restaurant, a gentle counterpoint to the clinking of silver on porcelain. Catherine felt a genuine smile touch her lips for the first time that evening. Chloe was right. This was nice. A world away from the takeout containers and board meetings that had consumed her life. She had ordered a glass of Barolo and was studying the menu, savoring the feeling of unapologetic indulgence, when a familiar grating laugh cut through the sophisticated ambience. Her blood ran cold. It couldn't be. Not here. Not tonight. She slowly, reluctantly lifted her head. And there he was, Jonathan Caldwell, holding court at a prime table near the center of the room. He was heavier now, a prosperous paunch straining against the buttons of his tailored shirt. His hair was thinner, but he compensated with an air of unshakable self-importance. And clinging to his arm, looking like a high-fashion mannequin, was Brittany. Catherine's first instinct was to shrink, to become invisible, to ask for the check and flee. The old shame, the feeling of being judged and found wanting, washed over her in a sickening wave. She could feel his voice in her head again. "This isn't your world, Kate." But then something shifted. She wasn't the woman who had cried on her friend's couch anymore. She was the CEO of a billion-dollar company. She owned the building her office was in. This was her world now. She paid for it. She built it. With a deep breath, she straightened her spine, took a deliberate sip of her wine, and turned her attention back to the menu. She would not be chased out. Fate, however, had other plans. Jonathan, gesturing expansively, while telling some doubtlessly self-aggrandizing story, caught her eye. For a fleeting moment, confusion flickered across his face. He squinted as if trying to place a vaguely familiar servant. Then, recognition dawned, followed by an expression of utter comical disbelief. He nudged Brittany, murmuring something in her ear. Brittany's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose as she glanced over her gaze, sweeping over Catherine's simple dress with dismissive speed before landing on her face. A slow, smug smirk spread across her lips. Catherine's stomach twisted. She knew what was coming. She braced herself. With a sigh that communicated he was about to perform a tedious act of charity, Jonathan excused himself and began to weave his way through the tables toward her. Each step he took felt like a drumbeat of doom. "Well, well, Catherine," he said, his voice a low, condescending boom that was just loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "I have to say, I'm surprised to see you here. This place is a little steep." He didn't greet her. He didn't ask how she was. He opened with an insult wrapped in feigned concern. The old Jonathan was alive and well. Catherine offered a cool, polite smile. "Jonathan, it's been a while." "It has," he agreed, his eyes roaming her table, noting she was alone. Celebrating something special. A new freelance gig, perhaps. The jab was obvious. He remembered her frantic, desperate hunt for freelance work just to stay afloat. You could say that she replied, her voice even. He leaned in conspiratorially, his cologne, the same overbearing, expensive scent she used to hate washing over her. "Listen, Kate, I'm glad you're treating yourself. I really am. But a word of advice from a friend," he said, using a term that was a lie on every level. "Don't get in over your head. The tasting menu here can run you close to a month's rent on whatever little place you've found. I'd hate for you to have an embarrassing situation when the check comes." The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of it stole her breath. He genuinely believed she was a charity case, a mouse who had accidentally wandered into the lion's den. The patrons at the next table, a well-dressed older couple, were now openly listening, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Catherine felt a flush of heat creep up her neck, not of shame, but of pure, unadulterated rage. It was a cold, sharp anger she hadn't felt in years. All the pain, all the humiliation, all his dismissive, cutting remarks from their past coalesced into a single blinding moment of clarity. "Thank you for your concern, Jonathan," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "But I think I can handle it." He chuckled, a self-satisfied rumbling sound. Famous last words. "Look, if you get into a jam, just don't look my way. Brittany is trying to impress some clients of hers over there, and a scene would be terribly gauche." He gestured vaguely toward his table, where Brittany was now watching them, with a look of bored superiority. He patted her on the shoulder, a gesture of patronizing finality. "Good to see you, Kate. Really. Try the bread. It's free." As he turned and walked back to his table, the smirk on his face was one of triumph. He had put the little woman back in her place. He sat down, and Catherine could see him recounting the conversation to Brittany, who let out that tinkling, cruel laugh. Catherine sat there motionless. The delicious Barolo now tasted like ash in her mouth. The beautiful restaurant felt like a Kaschwitz. He hadn't just insulted her. He had tried to publicly humiliate her, to reinforce the narrative that she was nothing without him. He had assumed with all the confidence of a king that she was poor, struggling, and foolish. He thought she couldn't afford her dinner. An idea, wild and audacious, sparked in her mind. It was insane. It was theatrical. It was exactly the kind of move he would never in a million years anticipate. He thought she couldn't afford dinner. Fine. She would buy him his, and everyone else's too. The rage that had flared in Catherine's chest didn't dissipate. Instead, it cooled, hardening into a diamond-sharp resolve. Revenge, she had always thought, was a petty and corrosive pursuit. She had focused on success, on building a better life, believing that was the ultimate victory. But sitting there under the weight of Jonathan's casual cruelty, she realized that some wounds don't heal with silent success. Some wounds needed to be cauterized publicly and decisively. This wasn't just about Jonathan anymore. It was about the woman he had tried to break. It was for the Catherine who ate ramen and coded until her eyes burned, for the Catherine who had been told her dreams were a rounding error. This single grand gesture wouldn't be for him to see her wealth. It would be for her to reclaim her own story right here in the arena he had chosen. She watched him for a moment. He was laughing, holding up his wine glass in a toast. He felt powerful. He felt generous for having deigned to speak to her. The thought made her stomach clench. With newfound purpose, she subtly flagged down a passing waiter. "Excuse me," she said, her voice low and steady. "I need to speak with the restaurant manager. In private, if possible." The waiter, a young man with attentive eyes, saw the seriousness in her expression and nodded. "Of course, madam. Right this way." He led her away from the main dining room toward a small, elegantly appointed office just off the kitchen. A distinguished man in his late 50s, with silver-streaked hair and an impeccably tailored suit, stood up from behind a large oak desk. His nameplate read, "Mr. Giordano, General Manager." "Good evening, madam. How can I help you? Is everything to your satisfaction?" he asked, his voice smooth and professional. Catherine closed the door behind her, granting them privacy. "Mr. Giordano, my evening has just become rather interesting. I have an unusual request." He gestured to a chair. "Please, at Aria we pride ourselves on accommodating the unusual." Catherine sat her hands clasped in her lap to still their trembling. "I want to pay for everyone's bill tonight. Every single table." Mr. Giordano's polite smile didn't falter, but his eyes sharpened with surprise. He had clearly heard requests for paying for a friend's table, or perhaps a special occasion group. But the entire restaurant? This was new. The entire restaurant, madame. He clarified his tone careful. "We are fully booked. That would be a substantial sum." "I'm aware," Catherine said calmly. "I would like you to calculate the total for every open check in the dining room right now. Food, drinks, everything. And then I would like you to add a 40% gratuity for your entire staff, from the chefs to the busboys. They are working hard and they deserve it." Now, for the first time, Mr. Giordano looked genuinely stunned. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. He saw no signs of mania or drunkenness. He saw a woman in a simple dress, with an aura of absolute seriousness. "May I ask the reason for this extraordinary act of generosity?" he inquired, his curiosity piqued. Catherine allowed herself a small wry smile. "Let's just say an old acquaintance reminded me of the importance of generosity. He was concerned I couldn't afford my own meal." She glanced through the small window in the door, her eyes finding Jonathan's table. Specifically, the gentleman at table 12. "I want to ensure his bill is most definitely covered." Mr. Giordano followed her gaze. He recognized Jonathan Caldwell, a regular, known for being a demanding customer and a mediocre tipper. A flicker of understanding and perhaps even amusement crossed the manager's face. The story was beginning to piece itself together in his mind. "I see," he said, a new warmth in his voice. "This is a fascinating request, Ms. Pierce," she supplied. "Catherine Pierce." She slid her card across the desk. It was the Terra Verde executive account. A sleek, black metal card with no spending limit. Mr. Giordano picked it up, his professional training keeping his expression neutral, but his eyes widened almost imperceptibly as he read the name. Catherine Pierce, Terra Verde. He was an astute businessman. He read the financial news. He knew exactly who she was, even if the public didn't. The anonymous, brilliant founder who had appeared out of nowhere. The story suddenly escalated from a personal drama to something legendary. He looked at her with newfound respect. Ms. Pierce, it would be my absolute honor to facilitate this. He turned to his computer, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He summoned a senior waiter to bring him the physical check slips from every station to ensure accuracy. The office was silent for several minutes, broken only by the clacking of keys and the quiet rustle of paper. Catherine sat perfectly still, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was real. This was happening. Finally, Mr. Giordano turned back to her, a slip of paper in his hand. He looked at the number, then back at her, as if to give her one last chance to back out. The total, Ms. Pierce, including the 40% staff gratuity, comes to $27,481.59. Catherine didn't even blink. She just nodded. That's fine. Please run the card. He did. The machine whirred and beeped, spitting out a receipt. He handed it to her with a pen. As she signed her name, a signature now worth billions, he leaned forward slightly. How would you like this to be announced, Ms. Pierce? We can be discreet, simply informing each table as they request their check. Catherine thought for a moment. Discretion was for another time. This was a statement. No, she said, her voice firm. I want you to make an announcement. To everyone. I want you to say that an anonymous benefactor wishes for everyone to enjoy their evening and that all their expenses have been taken care of. And the gentleman at table 12, Mr. Giordano, asked, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. After the main announcement, Catherine said, I would like you personally to go to his table. Please present him with a bill for $0 and inform him that his ex-wife, Catherine Pierce, was especially keen to ensure he was well taken care of tonight, as she was worried he might have an embarrassing situation when the check came. She used his exact words, the petty, condescending phrase now weaponized and aimed right back at his ego. Mr. Giordano's eyes lit up. This was better than theatre. Madam, he said, with a slight bow of his head, the execution will be flawless. Catherine returned to her table, her movements calm and measured, a stark contrast to the thunderous beating of her heart. She felt a strange, heady mix of terror and exhilaration. She picked up her wineglass, her hand steady, and took a sip. From across the room, she could feel Jonathan's gaze on her. He likely assumed she had been complaining to the manager, perhaps trying to get a free dessert for some imagined slight. His expression was one of smug pity. He had no idea the tidal wave that was about to crash down upon his perfectly curated evening. A few minutes later, Mr. Giordano stepped into the center of the dining room. He stood with a relaxed posture, but his presence commanded attention. He tapped a small glass with a spoon, producing a clear, ringing chime that cut through the chatter. A hush fell over Aria Ristorante. Diners looked up from their conversations' forks, frozen midway to their mouths. A restaurant-wide announcement was highly unusual. Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention for just a moment? Mr. Giordano's voice was warm and resonant, filling the space. Aria Ristorante, thanks you for your patronage this evening. We have a small but rather unique announcement. He paused for dramatic effect. Catherine's eyes were locked on Jonathan. He was looking at the manager with an annoyed expression, as if his important conversation had been rudely interrupted. Tonight, Mr. Giordano continued, a smile in his voice. A fellow diner who wishes to remain anonymous has extended an extraordinary gesture of generosity. In the spirit of celebrating a personal victory, this benefactor has requested the privilege of paying for every single meal in the restaurant tonight. A collective gasp went through the room, followed by a wave of confused murmuring. People looked at each other, then at the manager, then back at each other. Was this a joke? A promotion, to be clear. Mr. Giordano said, his voice rising slightly to be heard over the buzz. Your entire bill from the appetizers to the vintage wines has been settled in full. There is no check to be signed, no card to be run. Furthermore, a generous gratuity has been left for the entire staff. Your evening is completely taken care of. The confusion erupted into stunned delight. A table of young tech workers whooped with joy. An elderly couple celebrating their anniversary looked at each other with teary, astonished eyes. Laughter and applause began to ripple through the room. It was a moment of pure, unexpected magic. Catherine watched the scene, a small, secret smile on her face. But her focus was singular. Jonathan. His face was a mask of utter bewilderment. He was looking around, trying to spot the anonymous benefactor. He likely assumed it was some billionaire titan of industry, perhaps the man at the table next to him, a known shipping magnate. The idea that this gesture could have anything to do with him or the woman he'd just insulted was so far outside his realm of possibility, it didn't even register. Brittany was equally stunned, her eyes wide as she whispered frantically to Jonathan, "Who would do that? Is it a celebrity?" And then came the masterstroke. As the applause began to die down, Mr. Giordano began to walk, not back to his office, but directly toward table 12. He moved with the grace of a panther, a single folded bill receipt held delicately between his fingers. Jonathan saw him coming and straightened up, a flicker of understanding, the wrong understanding in his eyes. He thought the manager was coming to tell him, a valued regular, who the secret benefactor was. He prepared his face to look impressed. Mr. Giordano stopped beside their table. The patrons nearby, sensing a second act to the play, fell silent again, watching intently. Mr. Caldwell, the manager, said, his voice polite but carrying an edge of steel. "A special message for you." He placed the receipt on the table. It showed the itemized list of their expensive meal, the lobster, thermidor, the wagyu steak, the vintage champagne. And at the bottom, in bold letters, it read, "Total $0, paid in full." Jonathan stared at it, confused. "Yes," you announced. "Someone paid for everyone." "Indeed, Mr. Giordano said, leaning in just enough for the surrounding tables to hear clearly. The anonymous benefactor made only one specific request. She wanted me to personally deliver your receipt and to pass on a message. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. She wanted me to inform you that your ex-wife, Ms. Catherine Pierce, was especially keen to ensure you were well taken care of tonight. The name hit Jonathan like a physical blow. His jaw went slack. His face, which had been flushed with wine and self-satisfaction, drained of all color, leaving a pasty grey pallor. His eyes darted wildly from the manager's face to Catherine's table across the room. She was watching him. She met his gaze, her expression perfectly neutral, and gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, a nod of dismissal. Mr. Giordano delivered the final, crushing line. "Ms. Pierce was apparently concerned you might have an embarrassing situation when the check came. She hopes you enjoyed your dinner." A wave of snickers and sharp intakes of breath rippled through the nearby tables. The older couple, who had overheard Jonathan's initial condescension, now stared at him with open contempt. The story was complete. They had witnessed the setup and now the devastating punchline. Brittany looked back and forth between Jonathan's horrified face and Catherine, a dawning, horrified comprehension on her own. The woman her partner had just mocked and pitied as a penniless loser had just bought out one of the most expensive restaurants in Seattle for an entire evening. The social humiliation was absolute. Jonathan looked as though he had been struck by lightning. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was a man who lived and died by status, by appearances. and in one fell swoop, Catherine had stripped him of all of it in front of his new partner, his clients, and a room full of his peers. She hadn't just proven him wrong, she had used his own arrogance as a weapon and annihilated him with it. The restaurant remained a theatre of Jonathan's humiliation. The initial buzz of excitement from the other diners had been replaced by a more focused, intense curiosity directed at table 12. Whispers were no longer about the free meal, but about the spectacular takedown they had just witnessed. "Did you hear? It was his ex-wife. He told her she couldn't afford it." The story spread through the room like wildfire. Jonathan sat paralyzed, his face a grotesque marble statue of shock. The receipt on the table felt like a death warrant for his ego. Brittany was fuming, her face tight with a fury born of pure social embarrassment. This was not the impressive power player evening she had envisioned. She was now part of a cautionary tale being whispered over dessert. For Catherine, the moment was surreal. The anger had subsided, replaced by a strange, hollow calm. She had done it. She had faced the ghost of her past and vanquished it. With a quiet grace, she placed her napkin on the table, stood up, and prepared to leave. She had no desire to gloat or to engage further. The act itself was the entire conversation. But Jonathan, jolted from his stupor by the sight of her leaving, finally found his voice and his legs. He scrambled to his feet, nearly knocking over his chair. "Kate." "Wait," he called out, his voice hoarse. He rushed toward her, intercepting her near the exit. His face was a desperate, pleading mess. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, frantic panic. "What was that?" he hissed, his voice low and trembling. "What kind of sick game is this? Where did you get that kind of money?" Catherine looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time in years, she felt nothing but a distant pity. He was so small, so utterly consumed by the one thing she no longer cared about. "It's not a game, Jonathan," she said, her voice cool and steady. "It's just my life now. Your life." "What life?" he sputtered. "The last I heard, you were selling paintings to make rent. How do you go from that to this?" He gestured wildly at the room of diners who were now enjoying a meal on her dime. This was the moment. The final piece of the puzzle she had kept hidden for 3 years. The ultimate twist that would reframe his entire understanding of the world he thought he dominated. "You were right about one thing, Jonathan," she began, her tone conversational. "There was no money in my little charity project. At least not at first. It took work. It took investment. The painting you so kindly let me keep was a good start." His eyes widened slightly, a flicker of memory. "That thing, that couldn't have paid for all this?" "No, it didn't," she agreed. "It paid for the servers, the first 2 developers, and an office the size of a closet. The rest—" She paused, letting the suspense build. "The rest came from the profits." He stared at her blankly. "Profits? What profits? What are you even doing?" Catherine allowed a small, genuine smile. It wasn't triumphant, but it was deeply satisfied. "I built the thing you said was impossible. My little computer club, as you called it." She looked him directly in the eye and delivered the final blow. "My name is Catherine Pierce, and I am the founder and CEO of Terra Verde." If the announcement about paying for the restaurant had been a lightning strike, this was the earthquake that followed, cracking the very foundations of Jonathan's world. His jaw didn't just drop, it seemed to unhinge. The blood drained so completely from his face that for a moment, Catherine worried he might actually faint. "Terra Verde," he whispered the name, tasting like poison on his tongue. No, that's impossible. The founder is anonymous. They use a pseudonym." "A necessary precaution at first," Catherine said. "I didn't want the distraction." Jonathan stumbled back a step, his mind reeling frantically, trying to connect the dots. Terra Verde wasn't just some successful app. It was a phenomenon. It was the white whale his venture capital firm, Northgate Capital, had been hunting for months. They were desperate to get in on the next round of funding. It was the deal that Jonathan's own boss, Mr. Peterson, had personally tasked him with. His entire career trajectory, his upcoming annual bonus, his very reputation at the firm was tied to securing a meeting with the mythical, untouchable founder of Terra Verde. And he had just spent the evening telling her she couldn't afford bread. The Northgate pitch. He stammered, his eyes wide with horror. The proposal for the Series C funding round. I've been sending emails for 6 weeks. To an address. An address for the founder's office. I know, Catherine said quietly. I've been reading them. They're very persistent. The full catastrophic scale of his miscalculation crashed down on him. He hadn't just insulted his ex-wife. He had insulted the single most important business contact of his entire career. He had called her a failure to her face, while simultaneously begging her through anonymous emails to make him rich. The irony was so potent, so devastating, it was almost poetic. He looked at her, at the woman in the simple black dress he had dismissed as a rounding error. And he finally saw her. He saw the power, the intelligence, the sheer indomitable will he had been too blind and arrogant to ever recognize. And in that moment, he knew he was ruined. The revelation hung in the air between them, thick and suffocating. Jonathan stared at Catherine, his mind a maelstrom of panic and regret. The architect of his potential salvation and the architect of his public humiliation were the same person. He had flown too close to the sun, and the sun had turned out to be the woman he'd thrown away. Kate. Catherine, I didn't know, he stammered, taking a clumsy step toward her, his hands outstretched in a desperate, pleading gesture. My God, if I had known, if you had known what Jonathan, Catherine asked, her voice cutting through his panic like ice, that I was successful, that I had money. Would you have been kinder? Would you have treated me like a human being instead of a piece of dirt on your shoe? Yes, of course. This is a misunderstanding, he babbled, his usual slick composure completely shattered. He was a drowning man, and the water was of his own making. From across the restaurant, Brittany, having seen the colour drain from Jonathan's face and the raw panic in his eyes, finally decided to intervene. She marched over her heels, clicking angrily on the polished floor. What is going on? She demanded, directing her fury not at Jonathan, but at Catherine. What did you say to him? Catherine simply looked at her, a silent, unimpressed gaze that seemed to take in Brittany's expensive dress, her perfect makeup, and dismiss it all as irrelevant. I was just catching up with my ex-husband, Catherine replied coolly. We were discussing business opportunities. Business, Jonathan croaked, seizing the word like a life raft. Yes, the deal. The Northgate deal. Catherine, we have to talk. My proposal. It's solid. It's the best offer you'll get. We can make billions together, like we should have. The audacity of it was breathtaking. In the span of 30 seconds, he had gone from insulting her to trying to leverage their painful past into a business partnership. Catherine let out a short, sharp laugh. It was not a sound of mirth, but of disbelief. Together, Jonathan, there is no we, there is no together. You made your choice 3 years ago in our kitchen. You chose a 5-year plan that didn't include me. She turned her gaze to Brittany, who looked confused and angry. And I believe you were a key feature of that plan. How's it working out for you, Brittany? Flushed, speechless. The Northgate proposal is off the table, Catherine stated, her voice leaving no room for negotiation. Effective immediately, I will not under any circumstances do business with a man who holds so little respect for others, especially not for me. Jonathan's face crumpled. No, you can't do that. This deal is my life. Peterson will kill me. Catherine, please. He actually reached out to grab her arm. Catherine flinched back, a spark of her old fear mixing with her new strength. Before she could react, Mr. Giordano materialized at her side, his presence calm but immovable. Is there a problem here, Ms. Pierce? He asked, his eyes fixed on Jonathan. Mr. Caldwell was just leaving, Catherine said firmly. No, I'm not leaving, Jonathan insisted, his voice rising to a pathetic whine. This is my... She's my, We have to talk. The sight was truly pitiful. The once mighty financial analyst, the king of his own small universe, was begging in the middle of a five-star restaurant. The other diners were now shamelessly watching the drama unfold. It was better than any show in town. Sir Mr. Giordano said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. I believe Miss Pierce has made her wishes clear. I suggest you return to your table, or I will have you removed from the premises. The threat of being physically ejected was the final humiliation. Defeated Jonathan, deflated. The fight went out of him, replaced by the hollow emptiness of absolute ruin. He stared at Catherine one last time, his eyes pleading, but he saw no mercy in hers. He saw only closure. He turned and shuffled back to his table, a broken man. Brittany was already gathering her purse, her face a mask of cold fury. Her evening of hobnobbing had turned into a public spectacle of the most mortifying kind. She shot a venomous glare at Catherine before turning her back on Jonathan, leaving him completely alone at the table, surrounded by the ghosts of the feast he hadn't paid for. Catherine gave a grateful nod to Mr. Giordano. Thank you. The pleasure was all mine, Miss Pierce, he said, with a genuine smile. Truly. She walked toward the grand double doors of the exit. As she passed, the elderly couple who had witnessed the entire arc of the evening raised their glasses to her in a silent, respectful toast. The young tech workers gave her a quiet, awestruck round of applause. She hadn't just paid for their dinner. She had delivered a masterclass in justice. Catherine stepped out into the cool, damp Seattle night. The city lights seemed to shine brighter. She took a deep breath, not of the polluted city air, but of the clean, crisp air of freedom. The ghost was gone. The echoes were silenced. The past was finally and completely behind her. The morning after the Aria Ristorante incident, Catherine awoke not to the expected rush of triumphant adrenaline, but to a profound and unnerving quiet. The storm had passed. The ghost she had carried for 3 years had been confronted, exposed, and had dissipated into nothing more than a pathetic memory. In its place was a strange, hollow stillness. She had won decisively and spectacularly, but the silence that followed felt vast and uncharted. It was the silence of a new beginning, and it was in its own way as intimidating as the battle itself. She went through her morning routine, a brisk run along the waterfront, a simple breakfast of avocado toast and black coffee, feeling like a stranger in her own skin. The anger that had fueled her for so long was gone, and she had to relearn how to move without its weight. Miles away, in a glass tower that scraped the sky, Jonathan Caldwell was experiencing a very different kind of morning. He hadn't slept. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands trembling as he straightened his tie for the 3rd time. He had received a one-line email at 6:00 a.m. My office, 8 a.m. sharp. Don't be late. Peterson. He walked into the plush, imposing office of Robert Peterson, the CEO of Northgate Capital, feeling like a condemned man walking to the gallows. Peterson, a formidable man with a reputation for surgical precision in both his investments and his dismissals, was standing by his window, looking down at the city. He didn't turn around. Tell me about Terra Verde. Jonathan Peterson, said, his voice deceptively calm. Jonathan's blood ran cold. Sir, it's the leading platform in the sustainable tech space. Incredible growth completely cornered the market. It's the company I've been pitching for the Series C funding. I know what it is, Peterson said, finally turning. His eyes were like chips of ice. What I want to know is about the founder, the brilliant, anonymous, untouchable founder we've been trying to get a meeting with for 6 months. The founder you assured me you were making significant headway with. I've been persistent, sir. The channels are very guarded. Jonathan began, his voice weak. Peterson held up a hand, silencing him. I got a call last night, Jonathan, from a friend who was dining at Aria Ristorante. He told me the most incredible story. A story about a mysterious tech CEO paying for the entire restaurant. A story about my vice president of acquisitions publicly humiliating himself. And then, this morning, I got an email from the CEO of Terra Verde herself. He walked over to his desk and picked up a single sheet of paper. She introduced herself. Catherine Pierce. Does that name ring a bell? Jonathan felt the floor dissolve beneath him. Robert, I can explain. It's a personal matter. A misunderstanding from years ago. A misunderstanding. Peterson's voice was now laced with a cold fury that was far more terrifying than shouting. You were tasked with landing the single biggest deal in this firm's 5-year plan. You found the person who holds the keys to that kingdom, and you told her she couldn't afford her dinner. You didn't just have a misunderstanding, Jonathan. You walked up to the winning lottery ticket, called it a worthless piece of scrap paper, and tried to light it on fire. In public. I didn't know it was her. Jonathan pleaded desperation, cracking his voice. That's the point. Peterson slammed his hand on the desk, the sound echoing in the silent office. Your job is to see value where others don't. Your job is to build relationships, to show respect, to treat the receptionist with the same courtesy as the CEO. Because you never know who is who. Instead, you acted like a petty, arrogant fool. Your personal life has now cost this firm a catastrophic amount of reputational damage and potentially hundreds of millions of dollars in future earnings. He leaned back in his leather chair, his face a mask of disappointment. Your conduct was antithetical to the ethos of Northgate Capital. Your personal judgment has proven to be a liability we can no longer afford. He slid a folder across the desk. This is your severance package. It is not generous. Security will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings. You have 10 minutes. Jonathan stared at the folder. His career, his identity, his entire 5-year plan, all of it gone. Evaporated in a single night of hubris. He had been dismissed like a rounding error. Catherine, oblivious to the drama unfolding in Jonathan's office, arrived at Terra Verde. The energy was electric. Her acquisition of their main competitor was the talk of the industry, and her team was buzzing with excitement and pride. She led the morning meeting, her voice steady and her vision clear, outlining the next steps for integration. Watching her team, the bright, passionate people who believed in her and her mission, she felt the strange emptiness begin to fill. This was real. This was what she had built. The noise of her past was finally being replaced by the sound of her future. That afternoon, she met Chloe for lunch. Her friend was practically vibrating with vicarious glee. Spill it. Every single detail, Chloe demanded after they ordered. I want to know the look on his face, and hers. Oh, I bet Brittany looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. Catherine recounted the story, her tone more analytical than triumphant. When she got to the part about revealing who she was, Chloe slammed her hand on the table. Yes. Oh my God. That's better than a movie. So what's next? Are you going to sue him for emotional distress, buy his company and fire him yourself? His company already fired him, Catherine said quietly. Chloe's jaw dropped. No way. How do you know I don't officially? But I will, Catherine said. She took a sip of her iced tea. Their CEO wants a meeting. Robert Peterson from Northgate. Chloe frowned. To do what, Gravel? You're not actually going to meet with them, are you? After Jonathan? After everything, I am, Catherine said simply. Kate, why? Chloe asked, her voice softening. You don't owe them anything. You won. You can work with any VC firm in the world right now. This isn't about winning anymore, Catherine explained, leaning forward. That part is over. This is about building. Jonathan's proposal, once you strip away all the nonsense, was strategically sound. Northgate has the global infrastructure we need for our next phase of expansion. His personal failure, doesn't negate their corporate value. She smiled wryly. He was a terrible husband, but he was on paper a decent analyst. My job now is to make the best decision for my company, and the best decision is to hear them out from a position of absolute power. Chloe stared at her for a long moment, then slowly broke into a wide smile. You're terrifying, you know that. In the best possible way, he tried to ruin your life and you're turning the wreckage into a business opportunity. That's my girl. Back in her office, the formal email from Robert Peterson was waiting just as she'd predicted. Her assistant Paige stood by, tablet in hand. Catherine read the groveling apology, her expression unreadable. When she reached the line confirming Jonathan's termination, the pang she felt was not for him, but for the ghost of the man she had once loved. The ambitious young man who had somewhere along the way curdled into this bitter, arrogant stranger. It was the final, definitive closing of a book she had been forced to carry for too long. What are your instructions? Ms. Pierce-Page asked, watching her boss carefully. Catherine turned from the email and looked out at her view. The city wasn't just a landscape anymore. It was a testament. Every building, every street, every light was a reminder that worlds could be built and worlds could be broken by a single decision. Jonathan had made his. Now she was making hers. Paige, she said, her voice imbued with a new, calm authority. Schedule a video conference with Mr. Peterson for next week. Let his assistant know that my time is limited, so he should be concise. And the tone, Paige asked, sensing the importance of this detail. The tone is that we are a global enterprise, exploring all our options, Catherine said, her eyes fixed on the horizon. He is not apologizing for a social faux pas. He is making a business pitch to me because his firm is now at a distinct disadvantage. Make sure he understands that. And Paige, yes, Ms. Pierce. When you send the confirmation, make sure you sign it from the office of Catherine Pierce. No more anonymity. The ghost is gone. Paige nodded, a look of profound respect on her face, and left to carry out the orders. Catherine stood alone, the afternoon sun warming her face through the glass. She had paid for dinner to prove a point to a man who didn't matter. But in the process, she had proven to herself that her empire wasn't built on revenge. It was built on resilience, intelligence, and the unwavering belief in a little charity project that was now changing the world. The view from the top was clear, and for the first time she felt she truly deserved it. In the end, Catherine Pierce didn't just pay for dinner. She brought back her own narrative. She reminded a man and a world that a person's worth is not determined by their partner, their income, or the price of their meal. It's forged in silence, in hard work, and in the refusal to be defined by those who try to keep you small. Jonathan's arrogance cost him his dinner, his job, and his future. Catherine's quiet dignity gained her the ultimate prize piece. What did you think of Catherine's ultimate power move? Was it perfect justice or a step too far? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more true stories of incredible triumphs. Thank you for listening.